Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2017 Realtor Day at the Capitol. I'm CWR's Government Affairs Director, Tyler Neese, and we're excited to have you this morning. I hope you're excited to head to Salem and advocate on behalf of the real estate industry here in Central Oregon at the state capitol. For our in-flight entertainment this morning, if you will, on our way over to Salem, you're going to be hearing from me on realtor advocacy and how we're at work for you in 2017 at the local level, the state level, and the national level. This presentation this morning is eligible for continuing education, so you'll be getting some CE for listening to this presentation on the bus here this morning. You'll also receive some CE for presentations from the OAR staff once we get to Salem. I want to start with a special thanks to Evergreen Home Loans, who have sponsored the breakfast and coffee you're enjoying this morning, as well as pizza and beer for the way home to celebrate a successful day of advocacy. So a big thanks to Evergreen Home Loans. We appreciate them making this event happen. Also, a special thank you to each one of you for being here today. I know that you're all very busy, you have clients and other obligations and businesses to run, but you taking the time to be here to advocate on behalf of your business, on behalf of your industry is what makes all the difference. There's strength in numbers. Advocacy is truly a team sport, and it takes every one of you sharing your expertise, lobbying and advocating on behalf of realtors and the real estate industry here in Central Oregon in order to advance key policies and prevent some really potentially detrimental policies from going into effect. So thank you. And the reason that events like Realtor Day at the Capitol are so important is, I think, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. This is kind of the why, right? And if you've heard me present before, heard me speak about advocacy or government affairs, you've probably heard me share this old adage, and I know we use it a lot in politics and government, and sometimes it's probably even overused, but I think this really gets to the heart of the issue and why advocacy is so important. If we are not at the table, if you are not in these meetings with legislators, if you are not advocating on behalf of these key issues, then someone else is going to, and someone else is going to come to the table from a different perspective. And as a result, it's very possible that we will be on the menu, that policies will be developed, that measures will be put in place that will be detrimental to your business. So this is the opportunity to either support your business, support your profession, or allow really policies to be put in place that will inhibit your ability to do business. So you being here today is ensuring that those key policies are supported and that we're playing defense, if you will, on the ones that we're trying to prevent. So as an overview of the presentation today, we're going to be looking again at the local level, government at the local level, and advocacy at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the climate at the local level, issues at the local level, and advocacy. The same at the state level. We're going to take a look at the climate in Salem. We're going to be looking at some of the key issues and then some of the advocacy that's taking place on your behalf. Same with the federal level. Again, climate, issues, and advocacy. That's going to be our theme today. So starting with the local level. When I talk about advocacy and I talk about government affairs, I also like to speak to the process and what that really looks like behind the scenes. So this is what local advocacy looks like as it pertains to COAR here specifically. First, letters and policy recommendations to local government. As I see it, if we are going to advocate on an issue, we need to first put in writing what our position is. We need to send a letter outlining whether we support a particular policy, measure, regulation, or if we're opposed to it, we need to outline that as well and basically say, hey, this is what we're going to do to oppose this policy because we feel it's detrimental, and or here are some recommendations we have for an alternative policy or an alternative route. Another is testimony before local government and key committees, so that might be city council, county commission in a particular area. This is something that I do quite often, basically going before these elected bodies and letting them know this is where our organization stands on this issue. This is what we feel you as elected officials should do. And I think it's also important that we offer to help. We can be a resource, we can provide recommendations, pool our collective expertise. Again, that's something we do quite often in order to help the process and ensure that good policy is made. Calls to action is also another important part of the advocacy process. You've seen these, I'm sure, from us, from OAR, from NAR. Basically, we send these out via email, and it will have a link to either a template letter or a form online. It allows you to easily contact elected officials and share your concerns, share your feedback on policies or particular actions. Campaign support and contributions for Realtor Champions is also an important part through Core Pack and funds that we might make available to Realtor Champions and those who are business friendly, who are realtor friendly and running for elected office. And why do we do this? Well, we do it because local government matters, and I think we know that. I think local elections and local government matters perhaps now more than ever. And I think one of the biggest reasons is when you look at some really key issues in some real key areas like land use, private property, taxes, those are all decided at the local level, and they're decided oftentimes very quickly, practically overnight. It seems like city council might meet on Wednesday and talk about a particular issue, and in a matter of days or weeks, all of a sudden we have an ordinance enacted or policy enacted that is going to affect you practically overnight, immediately. So for those reasons, it's very important that we're diligent and that we're keeping a close eye on what local government is doing, what policies are being proposed, so that we are nimble and able to react and represent your business. So with that context, what does the climate of local government look like right now? We're going to talk about climate at the state level and the national level or the federal level here shortly. It's a little harder to pin that down at the local level because we have 3 counties we represent within COR's jurisdiction. We also have 7 cities. So in all of these different communities and areas, there's obviously a different climate. Local government looks different. They are reacting differently. They are focused on different priorities. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the kind of overarching issues and some things that are really driving policy. But I think, one thing that we're probably going to see, and we've already seen in some communities, that is really a trickle down from the federal level is, as a result of this kind of deregulatory approach that we're seeing from this current administration, some local governments are going to be looking to compensate in introducing more regulation. I think we'll see this, and we already have, especially in cities and counties with more progressive, maybe activist type elected officials. They're going to be proposing those progressive policies. And I think regardless of where we are in Central Oregon, growth is going to be driving a lot of the policy making, and it already has been driving a lot of the policy making, and we'll talk about that more here in a moment. This is true, I think, throughout numerous parts of Oregon, but it's especially true here in Central Oregon. And as you well know, Central Oregon is growing rapidly. As an example, Deschutes and Crook counties are among the fastest growing communities in the nation. This is based on U.S. Census Bureau population estimates. And I think this data really drives home the growth that is occurring here in Central Oregon and illustrates that well. Bend Redmond, the metro area, was listed as the 3rd fastest growing metropolitan statistical area in the U.S. between July 2015 and July 2016. Crook County is 8th among the fastest growing counties in the country. And I wanted to share a couple of slides I received from Deschutes County to, again, illustrate this growth. This graph, as you can see, shows population growth between 1960 and 2015, and you can see there's quite an upward trend. And as you'll see here in a moment on some further slides, that trend is not projected to slow anytime soon. And here's another slide from Deschutes County showing that growth again. This is what's projected moving forward, and as you can see, just continuing to grow through 2065, showing the population taking a significant jump, more than doubling over that period of time. And these numbers, this data is from Portland State University, their Population Research Center. Portland State is an organization, is a university that a lot of cities and counties throughout Central Oregon use for these type of projections, statistics, and data. So you'll see that in some of the other information we'll be taking a look at this morning. Similarly, Bend is projected to continue to grow. You've probably seen some of the projections and estimates related to Bend specifically, but those forecasts show, and again, this is from some of the experts over in the Valley in the Portland area, that Bend's population will be around 109,000 by 2025 and 120,000 by 2030. So again, continued rapid growth in our area. And I love this quote from Will Rogers: "The trouble with land is that they're not making it anymore." And I think this quote is especially poignant in our current climate and as we look at our industry, which relies so much on land, and prices are dependent and driven so much on land and the cost of land. Obviously, something else that is impacted greatly by growth and really driven by growth or the urban growth boundaries here within the state of Oregon. As you know, we have a very unique, I think, land use system, and in many ways are very restrictive, probably one of the most restrictive land use systems in the country. I think you can argue on either side of that equation and discuss its benefits as well as its drawbacks, but there's really no question that the UGB system has a significant impact on the way we develop, the way we build, the way we provide housing in Oregon, especially in Central Oregon. As you know, Bend recently had approved by the state its UGB remand, its expansion package, nearly 2,400 acres. May sound significant, but as I'm sure most of you know, really in light of the changes that we're experiencing, the growth that we're experiencing, and that is projected, that's not really going to do a whole lot. It's going to chip away, but we will need more very soon, obviously. Madras, another Central Oregon community that is bringing in 609 acres, and this is primarily for the municipal airport plus the new Daimler Trucks North America testing facility, which is really neat. If you haven't checked that out, I would encourage you to go online, learn a little more about that. I think it's going to be a boon for that region. There's already some testing that's been going on at the municipal airport, but Daimler is looking to create this really significant expansion and put in a pretty extensive testing track, hopefully bring in some jobs and things like that. EDCO and other organizations have some videos that will kind of give you a virtual tour. Really neat to see. Sisters also talking about UGB expansion. So with all of this growth taking place and projected to continue, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're going to be seeing some changes to our region. This was my excuse to quote David Bowie in a presentation. I'm not going to sing it, but for all of you Bowie fans on the bus, please feel free to break into song right now. Some of those changes, again, I think will be related specifically to the urban growth boundary in Bend and other areas and those expansions. So with Bend's UGB, again, for example, we will see densification, urbanization, infill. We've seen these things, but we will certainly continue to see that taking place as the city looks to meet the requirements put upon it by the state before it can ask for more land, more expansion moving forward. I think that may result in some new and different products for realtors here in the region. We may see more condos, we may see more types of different housing typologies. So the product that you're selling may change, or at least you may see more options moving forward. Obviously, time will tell, but those changes and those new products could be very favorable for the industry. I included this data because I think it's interesting. It speaks to what home buyers view as important right now. Again, these are the key characteristics today's home buyers feel are very important. As you can see, 39% walkability, 32% feel that proximity to work is very important, 26% really value neighborhood diversity, and 25% public transportation. I think those are some key themes that we see throughout the UGB package and some components of the UGB package, as well as some legislation in Salem related to transportation, related to urban areas. As we're discussing climate at the local level, we would certainly be remiss in not mentioning affordable housing. We know that we have an affordable housing crisis really statewide, and I think acutely in some key areas like here in Central Oregon. We know that demand is outstripping supply. We know that there's a significant need for workforce housing. When we don't have housing available for the people who work in the service industry, who work at grocery stores and coffee shops and things of that nature, that's a concern when those people can't afford to live in the community that they work in. We also know that we have something called the missing middle here in Central Oregon. COAR has been heavily involved and helped lead a workforce housing work group that's essentially a coalition of different organizations throughout the community here in Bend, looking at this problem of workforce housing, looking specifically at this idea of the missing middle, which basically says that you have single family homes and you have apartments, but you don't have really this kind of transitional housing in the middle, things like duplexes, triplexes perhaps, that kind of provide that transition that a lot of studies and research show is so necessary in communities. And this slide is an illustration of that idea of the missing middle. As you can see, we have detached single-family homes on the far left, mid-rise, or your apartment complexes on the right. In between, there's some different housing typologies. So you have duplexes, triplexes, bungalow courts, townhouses, things like that. And right now, we do see a gap like that in Bend. We have, I believe, there's about 2,000 apartments coming online here very soon in Bend. Not a lot of apartment options currently, but that number again obviously about to increase. But that middle ground is what is currently missing. And on Monday night at the Tower Theater, some of you may have attended an event where this was the topic of conversation that was put on again by the Housing Workforce Work Group, that coalition of community partners. If you weren't able to attend that event, I encourage you to look into some of the reports, and there will be some articles coming out after the fact. Really interesting speaker and study looking into that issue more specifically. And this is a slide from the city of Bend that I think does a really good job of illustrating the affordable housing issue in Bend. And so as you can see, this shows affordable housing costs and units by income level, and really breaks it down by area median income. So looking at, again, some key benchmarks like 60%, 80% AMI, and what is available and the cost within those ranges. And in light of this growth in our region and the affordable housing crisis and lack of affordable housing, we've seen lawmakers present some possible solutions. And I have solutions here in quotes because I think some of these, while well-intentioned, are actually having a negative impact on affordable housing, or have the potential to perhaps in the future have a negative impact on affordable housing. One of those is the 90-day no-cause termination requirement that's now in place here in Bend. This was passed in December. And when this was initially proposed, we went to COAR members and said, tell us what you think. We conducted a survey. We found that an overwhelming majority of members were very concerned and said, no, we need to fight this. And that's what we did. We wrote letters, we testified before City Council, as did the Rental Owners Association here locally, who is very vocal, obviously, on this topic. And it actually passed. It went through. City Council felt that even against the advice of organization and others, as well as the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, that this was a good idea. And I think that they recognized in Bend that it was not a solution to affordable housing, but felt it was going to provide some relief or provide some assistance to tenants. The concern is what we're hearing from property owners who own affordable housing and property managers is that there's very little incentive with further regulation for property owners to maintain their properties, especially in this market. Why would you not just sell? So that's a concern and something we're certainly going to be watching to see, and I think hopefully we'll have some data from other organizations available soon to see what kind of impact these types of policies have had. Because if you're actually incentivizing property owners to sell and further reducing the stock and the supply of affordable housing, that's really not a good solution. Locally, we've also seen some code changes that have some pretty big implications. Code changes obviously are something that are pretty routine, happen in cities and communities all the time. However, a lot of times baked into those code changes are some pretty big changes that could significantly impact the real estate industry in the local market. One example is La Pine. There was a proposed garage requirement. There is a proposed garage requirement. It's still in play in La Pine. And this is something we heard from members in that area who said, hey, we're really concerned about this. Basically, what the city proposed was that all single-family dwellings and duplexes must have a minimum of a one-car private attached garage with exterior siding and paint colors the same or similar to the dwelling unit. This is obviously pretty restrictive, especially in a community like La Pine, where I think people really value, large lots, have a little more land and space to spread out, typically have shops in larger buildings. So we, together with realtors from La Pine, went to the Planning Commission and testified and said, hey, we don't think this is a good idea. We expressed our concerns, we wrote letters as well. And as a result, the Planning Commission kind of went back, and I think it represents a compromise, but they came back with some revised language that shows that it only applies to lots less than 1/3 of an acre. So while this, again, I think is a compromise, in talking with our members in Lapine, we still don't feel that it's a good policy. So we again went back to Planning Commission and voiced those concerns. Unfortunately, it moved forward. It's now going to City Council for another public hearing. We will maintain that opposition, and we'll certainly keep you posted as this policy moves forward. Another code change, very similar to the previously mentioned garage requirement in Lapine, was a proposed code as part of some amendments in Redmond. Basically, Redmond had proposed changes and amendments to sections of their development code that required alley load for, or rear entry only developments. Basically, they were saying, you know, that's what the master plan has to be alley loaded. So again, this is something that we heard from our members in Redmond about, and they said, you know, we're very concerned about this. We weighed in on the issue, testified before City Council. The Planning Commission was also very opposed to it and made that recommendation to City Council that this not move forward. It is still on the table. It's something we will continue to watch. They've kind of put together a workforce group to address this issue specifically, so we will monitor and maintain our opposition and keep you posted on this issue as well. So transportation, we know this is always a big issue at the local level, especially at the state level, but I think it's really going to be an issue as we move forward with the urban growth boundary here in Bend. If we look at expansions in other areas, because cities are going to be looking to reduce the load on the road. They'll be looking at increased traffic. They'll be looking at alternative modes of transportation. Bend recently is updating its transportation system plan, and this was a significant focus as how that fits in with the UGB. Also looking to reduce vehicle miles traveled in a lot of our communities. As some communities become more and more expensive and people have to live in outlying areas as a result of increasing costs, I think we're seeing more vehicle miles traveled as people commute for work, for play, for other reasons. So that's going to be a significant focus too, and there's some bills in Salem related to transportation, as there always are, but I think this is a big focus right now, again, with affordable housing and some of the other issues that are really at the forefront in this session. There's some city and county backed bills as well that are looking to provide some support to our local communities. Streets are always a hot topic in Central Oregon, especially in Bend. I think it's no secret that we are in desperate need of repairs to our streets within the city of Bend. In fact, this screen may be shaking as we're driving over potholes right now. But I wanted to include this map. I think this is a good resource, a good really, kind of visual for street preservation projects that are going to be taking place in 2017. If you go to the City of Bend's website, bendoregon.gov/street preservation, you can kind of see how the city has outlined some of their preservation projects for the year. Septic and sewer in the city of Bend is also a big local issue. If you haven't heard about this, I'm sure you will more soon. But this has garnered a lot of media attention. It's been featured in The Source as well as the Bulletin lately. I believe there's even been a couple of features on KTVZ on this specific issue. But basically, state law in Oregon requires that if you're within 300 feet of a sewer line and you're currently on septic, if your septic fails or needs to be replaced, you are required to hook up. And obviously there can be some pretty significant cost associated with that, tens of thousands of dollars in some cases, and that's why it's gotten so much media attention. One of the stories in particular was a couple of elderly sisters who lived together were looking to sell their home. They fell into this category and were going to have to spend, I believe it was about $80,000 because of the location of the septic. Obviously, the cost is related to how easy it is to run a line if it's direct or you have to go around things and things like that. But this is really going to be coming to a head with the completion of the Southeast Interceptor in Bend that's really going to expand that network of sewer even further. So COAR has developed a disclosure form that's available on our website. If you go to coar.com, go to the Government Affairs section, Tools and Resources, we have a form there. It's also going to be in links and docs soon. And we've advocated for local improvement districts as well to help offset the costs for homeowners. That's obviously a significant burden to put on someone. Not many Many of us, I think, have $50,000 laying around earmarked for updating, our septic or sewer. So this is something we certainly want to watch, something we're going to continue to weigh in on. We most recently did that as part of the goal setting process for the city of Bend. So some local issues that may be on the horizon. Rent control, first of all. We know that we're seeing more and more regulation. At the local level, we've seen some things at play that we'll talk about a little more at the state level that could be imposed on local governments. The end of no-cause evictions or terminations. Again, this is something related to rent, to landlord-tenant law that we could see coming too. Landlords required to pay relocation fees for evicted tenants. That's something that is already in place in Portland. You may have heard about the Portland City Council passing this particular law. Inclusionary zoning is something we're watching very closely too. If you're not familiar with inclusionary zoning, it's basically a policy that stipulates that a given percentage of new development must be affordable housing. Now at COAR, we believe very strongly in incentives for affordable housing. As we discussed, we know that we have a very serious affordable housing issue here in Central Oregon. However, we don't believe in requirements for inclusionary zoning. And inclusionary zoning for a long time was banned in the state of Oregon. A long-standing ban, about 17 years, and was one of only a couple of states that still had such a ban in place. But during the last short session of the state legislature, they passed a housing package that included a lift on that ban, which means that inclusionary zoning is now at the discretion of local governments. Now there's various, kind of types of inclusionary zoning. Sometimes people talk about, mandatory inclusionary zoning versus incentivized inclusionary zoning or things of that nature. But I think, inclusionary zoning is a significant concern for us because it can actually create a steeper entrance to the market and end up kind of pricing out your middle market, your middle class buyer. So that's something that's obviously not desirable and I think is certainly an unintended consequence. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that and looking at how local governments approach it, how they understand it. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as well, but we'll be tracking that and keeping you posted. So city goals are something I wanted to touch on as well. I wanted to include this slide from the Bend City Council, their goals, just because I think they really relate and speak to a lot of the issues that we've touched on so far. This is a pretty common process for local government, for cities and communities throughout our region. They undergo a goal-setting process every biennium or every year or as a new council is sworn in to really determine how limited budget dollars are used, how limited staffing and resources are used, and the prioritization of issues moving forward. So as you can see, goal number 1 is determined by the Bend City Council was to execute a growth plan that preserves community values. Again, growth, very key, right? Goal number 2, move people around Bend quickly, safely, and reliably, so transportation. Goal number 3, increase affordable housing options. We know that this is very important. Goal number 4, keep residents safe with innovative and cost-effective public safety services. Goal number 5, modernize and professionalize how city government runs. The goal-setting process for the City of Bend is something that COAR was very involved in. Our Government Affairs Committee weighed in by basically looking at what are the priorities for our organization, and some of the things that we brought to the Bend City Council was affordable housing was one of those things. We talked about transportation. We talked about alternative modes, the load on road, things like that we've already touched on. We also talked about local improvement districts and that septic sewer issue. So we're happy to see that those things were included into the final goals for the City of Bend. I think goal number 5 is important to touch on. Modernize and professionalize how city government runs. This was a goal that I think has really been a focus for some community partners, some community organizations that worked as part of a coalition, including City Club, the Bend Chamber, Bend 2030, and they really started this charter review process, looking at how city government functions in the city of Bend. Bend is one of a few cities within the state, and I believe the largest one in the state, that does not have a directly elected mayor. Basically, within the city of Bend, if you're not aware, the councilors that are elected choose from amongst themselves who will be the next mayor of the city. While, there may be pluses and minuses to that type of system. Not having a directly elected mayor obviously means that the voters, that the community did not have input or buy-in into that decision. So that's one of the aspects, one of the facets that this charter review group that has involved a lot of community input has been involved in. COAR weighed into that process and basically said that, we as an organization support a directly elected mayor. We think that would be a good step forward, a good, sign of growth and development for a growing city. We also support a ward system. So all of the city councilors within the city of Bend right now are elected at large. And basically that means that, you can have a council that's weighted pretty heavily to one region or one side of town, and that's been the case with the last couple of councils. We have more councilors from the west side than the east side, so having a ward or region system would ensure that there is representation from all parts of the community. You might, as part of that system, maybe still have one or two at-large seats, but you would certainly see more representation from, the east side. You would see a balance versus, again, the scales maybe tipping much more heavily one way than the other. So we weighed in, again, said we support a directly elected mayor, we support a ward system. Something else that was on the table was increasing counselors' pay. It's essentially a volunteer position right now, and they receive a very, very small stipend. But we believe that that's really the way it should be. That you need people who are willing to give back, and this is not where their primary expertise or focus comes from. So that was our feedback. That was how we weighed into that process based on the Government Affairs Committee review and thoughts. I wanted to close out the local portion of this presentation with kind of a bright spot, with an update on some advocacy that I think we probably don't often think about when we think about realtor advocacy or when we think about government affairs within the realtor organization at large. So the Ben Lapine School District has put forward a bond to fund new school safety improvements, classroom renovations, and preservation in the district. Again, I think in response really to the explosive growth we've seen in the region and the needs that exist within the district's schools. This bond would raise $268.3 million for school construction projects and improvements, and the overall tax rate as a result is projected to increase by 44 cents per 1,000 of taxable value annually over the life of the proposed bond. And as you can see, that's equal to an estimated cost of $7 per month on a home with a taxable value of $200,000, which is what Deschutes County has defined. So that's on the ballot for the May 16th, 2017. And COAR has endorsed the bond measure and is supporting the school board's work in this area, contributing $5,000 from the Issues Mobilization Fund to help support the bond effort. The Issues Mobilization Fund is aptly named because it exists for issues. Core PAC exists for candidates, but Issues Mobilization is a fund that is available through COAR to support things like bond measures, things like ballot measures. So if you recall, in the last election, there was an issue on the ballot related to Deschutes County 911 that would basically provide some funding to update some communications equipment that was really in desperate need of updating and repair for first responders. So COAR similarly was able to put some money forward from the Issues Mobilization Fund to help that ballot measure pass, and we're happy to report that it did pass. So now let's change gears and talk about advocacy and the issues at the state level. In the state Senate, as I'm sure you know, Democrats have the majority. However, I think it's important to note that they don't have a supermajority. If they had 18 seats in the state Senate, they would have a supermajority, which would mean that they're able to introduce revenue-raising legislation without a single Republican vote. So things like certain taxes, that could be pushed through. So there is a little bit more of a balance, but there's certainly a clear majority for the Democrats, 17-13. And the 30-member state Senate. The state House makeup of the 60 seats, 35 of those are held by Democrats and 25 by Republicans. The key players in the state legislature: the Speaker of the House is Tina Kotek from Portland, the House Majority Leader Jennifer Williamson from Portland, the Representative that is the House Minority Leader is Mike McLean from Prineville here in Central Oregon. In the Oregon State Senate, the Senate President is Peter Courtney from Salem. Jenny Burdick is the Senate Majority Leader, also from Portland. The Senate Minority Leader is Ted Ferroli from John Day. So if you've ever wondered why government is inefficient and perhaps doesn't run that smoothly, I think this is a good illustration. This is a diagram that was developed by the state of Oregon to basically show the process of how an idea becomes a law. And I think it's funny that it says a simple view of the Oregon legislative process, and it's really anything but simple. As you can see, from where an idea is basically introduced, becomes a bill, has to go through both chambers at the state level before it's eventually signed by the governor, lands on the governor's desk. But this is a good reference if you're ever hearing about certain bills, hearing about certain legislation, what committees it's in, and what its next steps are, or if you're wondering where it goes from here in the process. You can go to OregonLegislature.gov to see this diagram, and I think it's somewhat helpful in dissecting the process. If nothing else, you can kind of follow the map and see where things stand. So I think sometimes people don't realize quite how many bills are introduced in a session of the legislature. We only hear about, it may seem like we're hearing about tons of bills, but in reality, we're only hearing about really a small portion because a lot of them die, a lot of them don't go anywhere, and others, may make it to different phases, and of course, there are some that are signed by the governor. But in this particular session, there have been more than 2,700 measures introduced. As you can see, as of Monday, 27 passed the House, 25 passed the Senate. Nothing's been signed by the governor yet, but we're moving that direction, obviously, with a number of different bills. And of those, roughly at the moment, 350 are being tracked by OAR. And I'm sure you've been seeing in your email and the calls for action, the information coming out about Realtor Day, different pieces of legislation that OAR is supporting, and also those they're opposing or tracking and monitoring. So let's take a look at those. A significant initiative that OAR is leading and some legislation that they're supporting are related to the first-time home buyers savings account. This is obviously a big deal, I think, here in Oregon, especially throughout the country, as we're seeing some changes in behavior related to renting versus home ownership, as especially some key demographics like the millennials are maybe more cost burdened, maybe looking at more student loans and seeing the idea of home ownership perhaps out of reach. And so that's something that a lot of groups are studying and looking at. But the one thing we know is that folks who are looking to buy a home are looking for some sort of support, some sort of incentive, and especially as we'll talk about later with things like the MID and the crosshairs, we're looking for solutions. And how do we provide that support? So House Bill 2669 and Senate Bill 849, the companion, as you can see here, allow for the subtraction of amounts contributed to account during each tax year from the account holder's federal taxable income. Exempts amount of interest and other income earned on account from taxation. There's a 10-year maximum period up to $50,000 and allows for withdrawal of funds for other reasons under certain circumstances. Appraisers are also a significant issue right now. I'm sure that none of you on the bus can relate to that, right? We've been hearing a lot, and I know OAR has been hearing a lot about difficulty securing appraisers, about the rates, about the costs related to appraisers. So it's clear that something needs to be done. And I think these solutions are really intended to start that conversation and take a step in that direction. House Bill 2501 requires appraiser certification and licensure board to adopt rules establishing payment rates for independent contractor appraisers. And it's also looking at setting that customary and reasonable rate. HJM, or House Joint Memorial 3, this basically is a message to the U.S. Congress asking for support in changing the minimum appraiser criteria, because we know that education and training is a pretty significant barrier to entry. If you're requiring someone to have a college education and also to study under someone to be an apprentice under an appraiser, yet they can't go to work for that person and they're essentially training their competition, that's a significant barrier to entry. So looking at perhaps in some respect kind of lowering those bars to ensure that we can get more people into the appraiser field, which is really aging fairly rapidly. I think there was a report from NAR recently that showed we'll touch on this here in a little bit, that the average age of appraisers, I believe, currently is about 57, and most are looking at retiring within the next 13 years. Yet we've seen very few appraisers coming into the profession. So simple math, with that many people leaving and very few coming in, we will see a further shortage. So it's clear that something needs to be done. So that's what these initiatives are really aiming to do. And now, taking a look at legislation OAR is opposing. The mortgage interest deduction, or the MID, this is a big one. House Bill 2006 limits mortgage interest deduction to primary residents only. Entirely eliminate the MID for individuals making $100,000 or more, $200,000 for joint filers. Would also cap the amount of interest that could be deducted for those individuals making under $100,000, $200,000 for joint filers, at $15,000 on their primary residence. And in addition, the bill eliminates the MID for second homes, which I think is a significant concern for us here in Central Oregon, where we have a lot of second homes and vacation homes. So the MID, this is a significant benefit of home ownership that a lot of people enjoy and take advantage of, and something that we are always looking to protect and fight for. And it has a target on its back at the federal level too. So it's something we're going to be discussing, I think, quite a bit, both through COAR, OAR, and NAR moving forward, because we want to ensure that we protect the MID and retain that benefit. Taxes is another issue that always makes it onto the agenda at various levels of government, right? We're always looking at adjusting taxes, reforming taxes. House Bill 2771 at the state raises income taxes on every homeowner earning $50,000, completely eliminates the ability to deduct property taxes for people who earn $125,000 annually. And I think the question that raises is, why should homeowners have to pay taxes on more money they already sent to local governments? They've already paid this. This is, kind of like we saw in Measure 97, a tax on a tax. With Measure 97, there was a tax on a tax on a tax, but tax on a tax is certainly bad enough. So again, looking at how are we attacking home ownership? How are we threatening home ownership, threatening the benefits of home ownership? This is something that OAR is strongly opposed to. Landlord and tenant. This is probably something you've seen a lot in emails from OAR. House Bill 2004 recently passed the House, but basically removes the current preemption on rent control. It allows for local government to determine rent amounts as well as fair rate of return on their investment. It requires that 90-day notice that we've already seen in Bend and other areas like Portland for sellers selling single-family rentals to a good faith purchaser, and may require payment of 1 month's rent if the landlord owns other rental units. Again, as you can see here, eliminates no-cause notices for all rentals except for month-to-month tenancies in the first 6 months of tenancy. Allows a tenant 1 year to file a complaint for any violation of the bill with 3 months rent plus damages due to the tenant. So a significant concern for OAR, something that you're going to be hearing about today. And I wanted to be sure to mention some resources as well to actually go and learn more about these bills that we're talking about, to read the legislation, to be able to track it, see where it stands in the process, what committee it's with, who's weighing in. You can go to OregonLegislature.gov. You can type in the bill's name, the number, the topic, and you can go and learn more about these different pieces of legislation. Another resource, and honestly a website that I think is a little more user-friendly and easier to navigate than the state's website related to legislation, is www.gov.oregonlive.com. This is a resource through the Oregonian, really through their politics government section, that allows you to go in and see how many bills have been introduced, how many measures have been introduced, how many have passed the House, passed the Senate. As you can see what's signed by the governor, you can track and get more information too. So now let's take a look at the federal level. I think this cartoon illustrates well the divide in Washington right now, the partisanship that's taking place. I think we've seen issues become highly politicized, especially in the wake of this election that was so divided, and I think really, drew people to party lines. And I think this is a question that a lot of lawmakers and elected officials, as well as pundits and others, are asking as well. Is, we saw such a clear divide, I think, in this election between supporters of our different candidates, and it became a really contentious election. And now, how do we kind of come together as a nation, and in some respects, maybe heal where there were wounds, and how do we work together around, policy and really, I think a lot of elected officials are going to be looking at what does this election mean for their reelection. They're obviously looking ahead to their campaigns and how they interact and how they engage supporters for the different candidates. So that said, this is what the Senate looks like currently. Of the 100 seats, we know that Republicans have the majority in the Senate. They have 52 seats. Democrats have 46 currently. There are 2 independents that are caucusing with the Democrats. In the House, of the 435 seats, again, Republicans have the majority in the House, 237 seats held by Republicans, 193 by Democrats, and there are currently 5 vacancies in the House. And as we're talking about the climate, I think, there's been a lot of issues that have gained a lot of media attention, but at least recently, these are 3, Russia, the new Supreme Court justice, and also healthcare, I think, are 3 that have really kind of drawn party lines, right? We've seen everyone kind of file in with their respective parties and vote accordingly, and it's really brought out that partisanship. An important component of the political climate is the Supreme Court, and we know we now have a new justice, Neil Gorsuch, who was confirmed as the 113th justice just recently, will now be serving on the Supreme Court, has been sworn in. And this was a pretty significant development, I think, especially in light of the nominee that Democrats were vying for previously. But this was, the result of a Senate vote that was pretty historic, 52-48 along party lines, and exercised really what's been kind of termed the nuclear option and in the abolishment of the filibuster. So that's what allowed this to move forward. And I think as a result, we're going to see obviously a more conservative majority within the Supreme Court. I think that the new justice is likely to vote in line with the court's conservative bloc, and that will provide a 5th vote for a conservative majority, of 5-4 in most cases. So looking at NAR's legislative and regulatory priorities for 2017, they fall within a few different categories. The first is home ownership and real estate investment tax policies. And so under that category, looking at the mortgage interest deduction, tax reform, mortgage debt cancellation, tax relief, capital gains exclusion on sale of principal residence. Under the category of credit and lending policies, GSE, so looking at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac reform, the G fees or guarantee fees. Insurance, the National Flood Insurance Reauthorization for that program, and healthcare reform, which is something we've obviously been hearing a lot about. In residential real estate finance, FHA lifetime mortgage insurance premiums, FHA condominium rules implementation. In business operations, obviously another key component, trade regulations, RESPA enforcement, independent contractor status, and worker classification of realtors. That's obviously a big one. Valuation issues, sales tax on professional services. On the commercial side, 1031 like-kind exchanges, immediate write-off expensing of commercial buildings, repeal of interest expense deduction. We've been hearing a lot about healthcare overhaul and reform of the ACA, but now the focus is starting to shift to overhauling tax code. And I like this cartoon because I think it really shows that, as complicated as healthcare reform is, overhauling the tax code is going to be even more complicated and something that we are sure to hear about for quite some time. So that said, we know there's a lot of work ahead of Congress. There's a lot of work ahead of those working at the federal level related to tax reform. Before it comes up for a vote, there's going to be a lot of debate about tax laws, and among those are some that are really important for realtors at the federal level, including commercial and residential real estate. Those things are going to be in the crosshairs. Tax reform legislation is something in terms of timeline that I think we'll see come into focus in late 2017, or excuse me, the summer of 2017. And there's some significant threats to the tax benefits of homeownership that we need to be aware of at the federal level, things that NAR is paying very careful attention to and is working on diligently. Massive increases to the standard deduction, as you can see here, would reduce the relevance of itemized deductions. Elimination of most other itemized deductions, such as the deduction for state and local taxes paid. That would greatly exacerbate the effect of a higher standard deduction. The National Flood Insurance Program reauthorization. We talked about this previously briefly, but this is a significant priority for NAR. They're asking for a 5-year extension on the program. It's set to expire on September 30th. They're advocating to maintain funding to update and improve the accuracy of flood maps. That's something that in certain regions within our state is a concern, even some areas within CRR's jurisdiction. A program lapse, as you can see, could affect nearly 40,000 real estate transactions per month. So there's a lot of risk involved in this as well. NFIP legislation, that is likely to move in late spring of 2017. And here's a graphic that I think just touches on the importance of the NFIP and some of the risk, again, that is involved in not ensuring that it's reauthorized. So I'm sure you'll be seeing some information coming out from OAR, calls to action, and other things. But go to the NAR website, go to the advocacy section to learn a little bit more about this issue and see what NAR is working on. So we touched on Fannie and Freddie earlier, but here's a little more information on those government-sponsored entities. We know that they play a key role in the secondary mortgage market. They're crucial in providing capital for mortgage lending. Without the GSEs and the FHA-insured loans, there would be almost no capital available for mortgage lending, and severely that would cause some restriction, if not, really curtail home sales and any supporting ancillary home sales services. As far as NAR's position, NAR supports restructuring the secondary mortgage market to ensure a reliable and affordable source of mortgage capital for consumers, restructuring of Fannie and Freddie to end government conservatorship, and some GSE legislation. That has no real projected start date, but that's the form that it will take, and something that we need to definitely be watching moving forward, and I'm sure NAR will be sending out some updates very soon. As far as the G fees, these are charged by Fannie and Freddie. They're a significant concern for NAR as well, and they translate into huge profits for these entities. The National Association of Realtors, as far as their position, they're pushing for the GREs for robust underwriting guidelines that put homeownership above profitability so that conventional borrowers are not priced out of the market, as you can see. Some legislation related to G fees has already been introduced. It's a bipartisan effort, as you can see. Representative Sanford and Representative Sherman from South Carolina and California, respectively, have introduced this bill known as the Risk Management and Homeowner Stability Act. Currently, we don't have similar legislation or a companion bill in the Senate, but something we'll be on the lookout for. And I've included this graphic from congress.gov because I think it's helpful in illustrating the legislative process, how a bill becomes a law. There are various steps within that process, and this is kind of a simplified version, but as you can see, once it's introduced, it has to go through committees, it has to go through scheduling. There's a lot of steps along the way before it lands on the president's desk and is signed into law. You may also remember the video, "I'm just a bill, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill." Have any of you ever seen that? It's from Schoolhouse Rock, used to be kind of a Saturday morning special. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to go online, go on Google or another search engine and just search for Schoolhouse Rock, "I'm just a bill." It seems kind of silly because it's a cartoon that, a lot of us watched when we were, children or in grade school, but it really does a very good job, I think, of, in simple terms, illustrating the process of how a bill becomes a law, with an adorable cartoon bill to boot, right? So go check that out if you're interested in learning more. And I mentioned congress.gov as the source of that graphic that kind of shows the process for how a bill becomes a law, but that's also a great resource to go check out if you want to learn more about a bill similar to the state legislature's website that we talked about earlier, although I think a little more robust and user-friendly. Congress.gov allows you to look up bills, see where they are in the process. You can also view a list of the co-sponsors who introduced the bill. You can expand from there and click on links to go visit the website for your senator or your congressman or congresswoman. So check out congress.gov, great resource where you can learn some more about what's happening at the federal level. So with that said, none of this happens without you. In order to advocate for realtors, in order to advocate for your business, for your professional practice, we need you. We need you, the people who are living this every day. What you're doing today is so important in that process. We can send emails, we can go and we can testify before city council, and all of those things are really key components of the process. But another major component is showing up at your lawmakers' offices, showing up as a show of force with realtors from across the state today, with your colleagues. This is what makes it all happen. This is what ensures that you have a voice at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. This is what I hope you look like at the end of today. This is how I hope you feel at the end of Realtor Day 2017. I hope that you feel empowered. I hope that you feel that you've made a difference regardless of how the meetings go, regardless of the outcomes on these particular bills or issues. I hope that you feel like you have been a key part of this process, because you really have. And I hope that you feel empowered by the fact that you have made your voice heard, that you've represented your industry locally, that you've represented your business before lawmakers in Salem. And again, thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking the time to advocate on behalf of your business, on behalf of your profession. From all of us here at COAR, thank you for being a realtor advocate. And now I'm going to turn it over to some of our key constituents on the bus to talk about some of the talking points for today's event and some of the messaging and the focus for your meetings with lawmakers.